The transport ship landed at Coalition Station Horizon, with a deep rumble that shook the docking bay floor. Yuna stood at the back of the Valorian delegation, her head lowered, her hands gripping the handles of heavy luggage cases. Around her, the other Valorians moved with pride and grace. Their deep blue scales caught the light and shimmered like the ocean under moonlight. They were beautiful. They were proud. They belonged. Yuna did not belong. Her scales were pale silver, almost white. Among her people, this was not simply different. It was wrong. The Valorians believed that scale color reflected the soul within. Deep blue meant strength, wisdom, and spiritual completeness. Pale scales meant emptiness. It meant a person born without a proper soul. It meant shame. She had heard the whispers all her life. Cursed one. Hollow child. The pale shame. She had learned to keep her eyes down and her mouth closed. She had learned that silence was safer than speech. She had learned that hope was a dangerous thing for someone like her. The delegation moved through the station's wide corridors. Coalition Station Horizon was a massive structure floating in neutral space, where species from across the galaxy came to negotiate, trade, and forge alliances. Yuna had never seen so many different beings in one place. Tall insectoid creatures with clicking mandibles, short furry beings with large eyes, scaled reptilians, floating entities made of light, and humans. The humans were everywhere. They seemed unremarkable at first glance. No scales, no claws, no natural armor. They were soft and small compared to many species. But they moved with a strange confidence, as if they did not know they were supposed to be afraid. Yuna followed the delegation to their assigned quarters in the diplomatic wing. Her room was not really a room. It was a storage closet, with a thin mat on the floor. This was normal. She was a servant, and servants did not deserve comfort. She set down her own small bag and immediately began unpacking the luggage for Elder Borum. Elder Borum was the head of the delegation. He was old, powerful, and cruel. His scales were the deepest blue Yuna had ever seen, and he wore his status like a weapon. He had personally requested Yuna for this mission, not because she was skilled, because he enjoyed having someone to punish. She worked quickly and quietly, hanging his robes, organizing his documents, preparing his sleeping area. She made no sound. She had learned long ago that being noticed meant being hurt. When she finished, she slipped out of his quarters and began her other duties. Cleaning, fetching, carrying. The other Valorians passed her in the halls without acknowledgement. To them, she was furniture. Less than furniture. At least furniture served a clear purpose. It was late in the station's artificial night cycle when Yuna finally stopped moving. She found an empty observation deck and stood before the massive window, looking out at the stars. They were beautiful, cold and distant, but beautiful. She wondered if there was a world out there where pale scales meant nothing, where she could simply exist without apology. She heard footsteps behind her and immediately tensed. She turned, ready to bow, ready to apologize for existing in a space she should not occupy. But it was not a Valorian. It was a human. He was tall for his species, with dark hair and calm eyes. He wore the uniform of station security. He looked at her for a moment, and Yuna felt her hearts beat faster with fear. She waited for him to tell her to leave, to report her for being somewhere above her station. He did neither. He simply nodded once and walked to another part of the observation deck. Giving her space, he stood there, looking out at the same stars, saying nothing. Yuna did not know what to do. She had never been given space before. She had never been treated as if her presence was acceptable. She waited for the trick, for the cruelty that always followed any moment of peace. It did not come. Eventually, she forced herself to leave. She did not look at the human again, but she remembered his face. She remembered the way he had looked at her without disgust or pity. Just acknowledgement, as if she were simply another person sharing the view. His name was Tejo. She would learn this later. For now, he was just the human who had not hurt her. The next day brought the beginning of treaty negotiations. The Valorians were seeking to establish new trade routes through coalition space, and the talks were expected to last several weeks. Una spent the morning serving food and drink to the delegates, moving silently around the room, invisible, in the way servants were meant to be. She made a mistake. It was small. A cup placed on the wrong side of Elder Borum's plate. Such a tiny error. Among humans, it would have meant nothing. Among Valorians, for a pale one, it was unforgivable. Borum's hand shot out and grabbed her wrist. His grip was crushing. Una gasped, but did not cry out. Crying out made it worse. "You dare serve me with such carelessness?" Borum's voice was low, but carried through the room. "You shame me before the coalition, with your incompetence." "Forgive me, Elder," Una whispered. "I will do better." "You are incapable of better. You are pale. You are empty. You are the shame we carry because tradition demands we not simply dispose of defective creatures." The room was silent. Delegates from other species watched with varying expressions. Some looked uncomfortable. Some looked curious. None intervened. This was internal Valorian business. Cultural practices were respected, even when they were ugly. Borum released her wrist with a shove that sent her stumbling. "Remove yourself from my sight, and know that tonight, there will be correction." Alatiman. Cresiar. Alatiman. Alatiman. Cresiar. Alatiman. Resiar. Alatiman. 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 Una bowed deeply and retreated from the room. Her wrist throbbed. Her eyes burned with tears she would not let fall. Correction meant beating. It meant pain that would leave her unable to sleep. It meant another night of biting her tongue to keep from screaming. She found her storage closet and sat in the darkness, waiting for the night to come. She did not see Tejo standing in the corridor outside the negotiation room. She did not see the way his jaw tightened as he watched her flee. She did not see him pull up his personal device and begin researching Valorian cultural practices regarding servants. She did not know that someone had noticed her. She did not know that someone was angry on her behalf. For now, she only knew what she had always known. She was pale. She was cursed. She was alone. And tonight, there would be pain. Una remembered very little of her parents. She had been taken from them when she was barely old enough to walk. This was the law. Pale children could not be raised by normal families. They would bring shame. They would poison the household with their spiritual emptiness. So they were taken and given to the servant houses, where they would learn their place. The servant house had been cold. Not just in temperature, but in everything. Cold food. Cold beds. Cold words. The caretakers did not hate the pale children. Hate would require emotion, and the pale ones were not worth emotion. They were simply trained. Trained to work. Trained to serve. Trained to accept that they deserved nothing more. Una had tried to be good. She had tried so hard. She thought that if she worked perfectly, if she never made mistakes, they might love her. They might see that she had a soul after all. She had been young and foolish then. The first beating came when she was 6 years old. She had dropped a dish. The caretaker had struck her across the face with an open hand. And Una had learned her first real lesson. Goodness did not matter. Effort did not matter. She was pale, and that was all that mattered. By the time she was grown, she had stopped hoping. Hope was exhausting. Hope was painful. It was easier to simply exist, to move through each day like water flowing around rocks, taking the path of least resistance, feeling as little as possible. Now she sat in her storage closet on Coalition Station Horizon, waiting for Elder Borum's correction. Her wrist still ached from where he had grabbed her. The bruise would be ugly by morning. It would join the other bruises, the old scars, the map of pain written across her body. The door opened. Una stood immediately, head bowed, ready to receive her punishment. But it was not Elder Borum. A young Valorian servant, one of the blue-scaled ones who served by choice rather than birth, stood in the doorway. Elder Borum has retired for the evening. He said to tell you that correction will wait until tomorrow. He wants you rested enough to feel it properly. The servant left without another word. Yuna stood alone in the darkness, not sure if she should feel relief or dread. Tomorrow. She had one more night of peace. One more night to exist, without fresh wounds. She could not stay in the closet. The walls felt too close, and her thoughts were too loud. She slipped out into the station's corridors, keeping to the shadows, making herself small and invisible as she had learned to do. She found an empty maintenance corridor far from the diplomatic wing. It was quiet here. No one would see her. No one would report her for being where she should not be. She sat against the wall and pulled up her sleeve. The bruise on her wrist was already darkening. She had a small medical kit that she had stolen years ago, and she began to wrap the injury with practiced hands. She had done this many times. She knew exactly how to bandage her own wounds. Footsteps echoed in the corridor. Yuna froze. Her hearts pounded. She looked up and saw a figure approaching. Human. Tall. Dark hair. The security officer from the observation deck. Taeho. He stopped when he saw her. His eyes moved from her face to the bandage in her hands, to the bruise she could not hide. His expression changed. It was subtle, but Yuna had spent her life reading faces for danger. She knew what anger looked like, but he was not angry at her. He was angry for her. She did not understand this. She scrambled to her feet, ready to run. I apologize. I should not be here. I will go. Wait. The word was soft, not a command but a request. Yuna stopped, trembling, waiting for what would come next. Taeho reached into his uniform and pulled out a small case, a medical kit, better than hers. He set it on the floor between them and stepped back. For your wrist, he said simply. Then he turned and walked away. Yuna stared at the kit. She did not touch it for a long time. This was a trick. It had to be a trick. People did not give things to pale ones. People did not help pale ones. There was always a cost, always a hidden cruelty waiting to emerge, but Taeho did not return. No one came to punish her for accepting a gift above her station. Eventually, slowly, she picked up the kit and opened it. Inside were bandages, healing salves, pain medication, things she had never been allowed to have. She treated her wrist properly for the first time in her life. The salve was cool and soothing. The bandage was clean and soft. Such small comforts. But to Yuna, they felt like miracles. She did not sleep that night. She sat in her closet, holding the medical kit, trying to understand what had happened. A human had shown her kindness. A human had seen her pain and responded with help, not harm. This did not fit anything she knew about the universe. In a different part of the station, Taeho sat in his quarters, reading. His screen displayed Valorian cultural documents, religious texts, legal codes. The more he read, the darker his expression became. The treatment of pale ones was not a secret. It was simply accepted, traditional, religious, legal. Pale Valorians were considered spiritually incomplete, and therefore they had no rights. They could be beaten, starved, worked to death, and no law would protect them. They were property, not people. Taeho had seen cruelty before. He had served in difficult places, witnessed terrible things. But this was different. This was cruelty dressed up as tradition, violence hidden behind the mask of culture. He thought of Yuna. The fear in her eyes. The way she had flinched when he approached. The bruise on her wrist. She had probably been hurt every day of her life, and she had come to expect nothing else. He brought his findings to Captain Yoonji the next morning. She listened without interruption, her face carefully neutral. This is Valorian internal business, she said when he finished. We cannot interfere with their cultural practices, even when those practices involve beating an innocent person, especially then. We are here to negotiate a trade route. The coalition cannot function if every species tries to reform every other species. We respect autonomy. We respect difference, even when that difference is ugly. Taeho was silent for a long moment. And if something happens in front of me? If I witness abuse directly? Unji met his eyes. Then you document it and report it through proper channels. You do not intervene. That is an order. Tejo nodded. Understood. He left her office and returned to his duties. But his mind stayed with Yuna. With the fear in her eyes. With the way she had wrapped her own wounds in a dark corridor. Alone. Expecting nothing but more pain. Proper channels. Documentation. Reports. These were the tools of civilization, of diplomacy, of peace between species. But sometimes, Tejo thought, proper channels were not enough. Sometimes, someone simply had to stand. He did not know when that moment would come. He only knew that when it did, he would be ready. The treaty negotiations were not going well. Yuna could see it in the way the Valorian delegates whispered to each other. In the tension that filled the conference rooms. In the sharp looks exchanged across tables. Something was wrong. Something was breaking. She did not know the details. Servants were not told such things. But she had learned to read the mood of her masters. Because knowing when danger was coming could mean the difference between a light punishment and a severe one. Elder Borum was angry. He had been angry for 3 days now, ever since a rival faction within the Valorian delegation had begun pushing back against his leadership. They wanted different terms for the treaty. They wanted more power. They wanted Borum to fail. Yuna stayed as far from him as possible. She completed her duties in silence, moving like a ghost, trying to be invisible. But she knew it would not be enough. When Borum was angry, he needed someone to hurt, and she was the easiest target. The correction he had promised never came. Not because he had forgotten, but because he was waiting. Waiting for the right moment. Waiting to make an example of her. That moment came on the 5th day of negotiations. Yuna was carrying a tray of documents from one conference room to another when she passed through the main atrium. This was the heart of Coalition Station Horizon. A massive open space where beings from dozens of species gathered to talk, trade, and observe. It was always crowded. Today, it was especially so, as delegations from across the galaxy had come to watch the Valorian treaty talks. She walked quickly, head down, eyes on the floor. She did not see Elder Borum until she was almost upon him. He stood in the center of the atrium, surrounded by other Valorian delegates and diplomats from a dozen different species. His deep blue scales seemed to glow with fury. His hands gripped a ceremonial staff, a symbol of his authority. Stop. His voice cut through the noise of the atrium. Everyone turned to look. Yuna froze, her blood going cold. Come here, Pale One. She had no choice. She walked forward on trembling legs and stopped before him. Head bowed. Tray clutched to her chest. Put that down. She set the tray on a nearby table. Her hands were shaking. Around her, she could feel the eyes of countless beings watching. Humans, insectoids, reptilians, all of them witnesses to whatever was about to happen. Last night, Borum said, his voice carrying across the atrium, sensitive documents went missing from my quarters. Documents related to the treaty negotiations. Documents that could sabotage everything we have worked for. Yuna's heart stopped. She knew where this was going. She knew, and there was nothing she could do. These documents were found this morning, Borum continued, in the servant quarters. In the storage closet, where this pale creature sleeps. Elder, I did not. Silence. His voice cracked like a whip. You do not speak unless spoken to. You do not defend yourself. You have no right to defense. You are pale. You are nothing. Tears burned in Yuna's eyes, but she did not let them fall. She would not give him that satisfaction. Among my people, Borum announced to the watching crowd, servants who steal from their masters are subject to physical correction. This is our law. This is our tradition, and this pale creature has brought shame upon our entire delegation. He raised his ceremonial staff. It was heavy, made of dense wood and metal. It could break bones. It could crack skulls. Yuna had seen what it could do to a body. She did not run. Running made it worse. Running meant the punishment would be doubled. She had learned this lesson in blood and pain. All she could do was close her eyes and wait. She heard the staff cut through the air. She heard the impact. But she felt nothing. She opened her eyes. A human stood between her and Elder Borum. He had caught the staff mid-swing, stopping it with his bare hand. His palm was bleeding where the metal edge had cut him, but he did not seem to notice. Teho. The atrium was completely silent. No one moved. No one spoke. This was unprecedented. A human had physically intervened in an internal Valorian matter. A human had dared to touch a Valorian elder. Release me. Borum's voice was ice. This is not your concern. Teho did not release him. Instead, he spoke, his voice calm and clear, loud enough for everyone to hear. I witnessed the document transfer yesterday evening. I saw a Valorian delegate, not a servant, moving materials between quarters. This woman was not present. Your accusation is false. One of the first, Borum's eyes widened, then narrowed with fury. You lie. You seek to protect this pale creature for your own purposes. I am a security officer. I document everything. My visual records will show exactly who handled those documents. A murmur ran through the crowd. Other species exchanged looks. This was becoming more than an internal Valorian matter. This was becoming a scandal. Even if your claim is true, Borum said slowly, this is not your business. This pale one is Valorian property. She is subject to Valorian law. You have no authority here. Teho released the staff. He stepped back, but he did not move away from Yuna. He remained between her and Borum, a shield of human flesh and bone. You are right, he said. I have no authority over her. He paused. But you have no authority over me. The words hung in the air. Their meaning was clear to everyone watching. If Borum wanted to strike Yuna, he would have to go through the human first. And attacking a coalition security officer in the middle of the main atrium would be a diplomatic disaster. Borum stared at Teho for a long moment. His grip tightened on the staff. His scales darkened with rage. Then, slowly, he smiled. Very well, human. If you wish to protect this pale creature so badly, then you may take her place. Before Teho could respond, Borum swung. The staff caught Teho across the face. The sound was terrible. A crack of wood against flesh and bone. Blood sprayed across the white floor. Yuna screamed, her hands flying to her mouth. Teho stumbled but did not fall. He straightened, blood running from a gash above his eye, and faced Borum again. Again? He asked quietly. Borum swung again. And again. 3 times the staff connected with human flesh. 3 times, Teho absorbed the blow without falling. Blood covered his face. His uniform was stained red, but he remained standing. By the 3rd strike, Borum was breathing hard. His arm was tired. His rage had turned to something else, something like fear. The atrium remained silent. Dozens of species watched as a human took a beating meant for someone else and refused to fall. Finally, Borum lowered his staff. His hands were shaking. This is not over, he hissed. He turned and strode away, his delegates following in confused silence. Yuna sank to her knees. She was crying now, unable to stop. She looked up at Teho, at the blood on his face, at the wounds he had taken for her. Why? She whispered. Why did you do that? Teho swayed slightly. His vision was blurring, but he managed to look down at her, and something almost like a smile crossed his bloody face. Because someone needed to, he said. Then he collapsed. The medical bay was bright and clean, and smelled of disinfectant. Teho lay on a bed, while a young medic, named Do-hun, worked on his wounds. The gash above his eye had required 7 stitches. His cheekbone was cracked but not broken. His ribs were bruised. He would heal. Captain Yunji stood at the foot of his bed, her arms crossed, her expression unreadable. Do you have any idea what you have done? She asked. Teho winced as Do-hun applied a bandage. Yes. You assaulted a Valorian elder. I stopped a weapon. I did not strike him. You interfered with an internal cultural practice in front of dozens of witnesses from multiple species. I stated a fact. I had evidence that the accusation was false. Unji leaned closer. And then you let him beat you. Teho was silent for a moment. Then, yes. Why? It was a simple question with a complicated answer. Teho thought about it as Do-hoon finished applying the bandages and stepped back. Because I could not stop him legally, Teho finally said. I had no authority to prevent him from punishing a Valorian servant, but I had the right to stand where I wanted to stand. And if he wanted to hit her, he had to hit me first. So you made yourself a target. I made myself a witness. A physical witness. Now everyone on this station knows what Valorians do to their pale ones. Now everyone has seen a human take a beating rather than let an innocent person be hurt. That matters. Yunji stared at him for a long moment. Then, slowly, she uncrossed her arms and sighed. You are either the bravest man I have ever met, or the most foolish. Probably both. A small smile crossed her face, quickly hidden. I should discipline you. I should write you up for violating my direct order not to intervene. I know. But I am not going to. She moved toward the door. Get some rest. The diplomatic situation is about to become very complicated. And I need you functional. I marted. Friendine too. Something's off-ro. She left. Do-hoon finished checking Teho's vitals and made some notes on his medical device. That was something, Do-hoon said quietly. What you did in the atrium. I have never seen anything like it. It was nothing. It was not nothing. The whole station is talking about it. The human who stood. The human who would not fall. Do-hoon paused. They are calling you a hero. Teho closed his eyes. I am not a hero. I just did what anyone should have done. But no one else did. That is what makes it matter. Before Teho could respond, the door opened again. A Valorian stood in the entrance. Pale silver scales, wide, frightened eyes. Yuna. Do-hoon moved to block her. This is a medical facility. You cannot let her in, Teho said. Do-hoon hesitated, then stepped aside. Yuna entered slowly, her head bowed, her hands clasped in front of her. She approached the bed, but did not look up. I came to apologize, she said softly. You are hurt because of me. This is my fault. I should have accepted the punishment. I should not have let you. Stop. Teho's voice was not harsh, but it was firm. Yuna fell silent. Come here, he said. Look at me. She raised her head slowly. Her eyes were red from crying. She looked at his bandaged face, at the blood that had soaked through in places, and her expression crumbled with guilt. This is not your fault, Teho said. The accusation was false. You did nothing wrong. Borum needed someone to blame for his failures, and he chose you because he knew you could not fight back. But you are hurt. I chose to be hurt. That was my decision. You do not carry the weight of my choices. Yuna did not seem to understand. She had spent her whole life being blamed for things beyond her control. The concept that she was not responsible for someone else's pain was foreign to her. Why? She asked again, the same question she had asked in the atrium. I am nothing. I am pale. I am less than a servant. Why would you suffer for me? Teho was quiet for a moment. He thought about his own life, his own experiences. He thought about the things that had shaped him into the man he was. Where I come from, he said slowly. We believe that every person has value. Not because of what they can do, or how they look, or what color their skin is. Just because they exist. Every life matters. Every person deserves protection. But I am not a person to my people. Then your people are wrong. The words were simple, but they struck Yuna like a physical blow. She had never heard anyone say that before. She had never imagined that the beliefs she had been taught her whole life could simply be wrong. I do not understand you, she whispered. I do not understand humans. You do not have to understand. You just have to know that you are not worthless. Whatever they told you, whatever they did to you, none of it was because of something wrong with you. It was because of something wrong with them. Tears slipped down Yuna's face. She did not try to hide them. For the first time in her life, she felt like crying was allowed. Do-hun stepped forward with a tissue, offering it to her silently. She took it, startled by the small kindness. "The captain has ordered a formal review of the incident," Do-hun said. "Taeho's visual recordings will be examined. If they prove the accusation was false, Elder Borum will face consequences." "He will never face consequences," Yuna said bitterly. "Pale ones cannot testify against their masters. My word means nothing." "Your word might not mean anything under Valorian law," Taeho said. "But this is coalition space. And a human security officer's recorded evidence means quite a lot." Yuna looked at him with something new in her eyes. It took Taeho a moment to recognize it, because he had never seen it on her face before. Hope. It was fragile and uncertain, like a candle flame in a strong wind. But it was there. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now," Taeho said, "we wait. We let the evidence speak. And we see what the coalition decides to do about a culture that treats its own people like property." He reached out and touched her hand. She flinched, an automatic response to contact, but she did not pull away. "Whatever happens," he said, "you are not alone anymore. I promise you that." Yuna looked down at his hand on hers. Human skin against Valorian scales. Two species, two worlds, two entirely different ways of seeing the universe. And yet, somehow, in this moment, they understood each other perfectly. "Thank you," she whispered. It was not enough. It would never be enough. But it was a start. Outside the medical bay, word spread through Coalition Station Horizon. The human who stood. The human who would not fall. The human who took a beating for a stranger, simply because it was the right thing to do. Something had changed on the station. Something had changed in the galaxy. And it had started with one human who refused to look away. News traveled fast on Coalition Station Horizon. Within hours of the incident in the atrium, everyone knew what had happened. The story spread from ship to ship, station to station, world to world. A human security officer had taken a beating meant for a Valorian slave. He had refused to fall. He had refused to let an innocent person be punished for a crime she did not commit. The Valorian delegation found themselves suddenly on the defensive. Other species began asking uncomfortable questions. How many pale ones were in Valorian service? What exactly did physical correction mean? Was it true that pale-scaled Valorians had no legal rights? Elder Borum tried to control the narrative. He gave interviews to various news services, explaining that the treatment of pale ones was a religious matter, protected by coalition rules regarding cultural autonomy. He described Taeho's intervention as a violation of Valorian sovereignty, an insult to their ancient traditions. But the damage was done. Captain Yunji summoned Yuna to her office 3 days after the incident. Yuna went with her head bowed, expecting punishment. Humans had rules too. Perhaps she had caused too much trouble. Perhaps they would send her back to Borum. Instead, Unji offered her a chair. "Sit down," the captain said. "I want to hear your story. Not what Elder Borum says happened. What actually happened." Yuna hesitated. "I cannot speak against my master. It is forbidden. This is not Valorian space. This is Coalition Station Horizon. Here, everyone can speak." Unji leaned forward. "I am not asking you as a captain questioning a servant. I am asking you, as one person asking another. What happened to you?" For a long moment, Yuna was silent. Then, slowly, she began to talk. She told Yunji about the servant house where she had been raised, about the beatings and the starvation and the cold, about being sold to Elder Borum when she was barely an adult, about years of abuse, humiliation, and pain, about watching other pale ones die from their injuries and being told it was because they deserved it. She talked for nearly an hour. When she finished, her voice was hoarse, and her face was wet with tears. Unji's expression had not changed throughout the story, but her hands gripped the edge of her desk so tightly that her knuckles were white. "Thank you," Unji said quietly. for trusting me with this. It does not matter, Yuna said. Nothing will change. The Valorians will protect their traditions. The Coalition will protect the treaty. I will be sent back. And I will be punished for speaking, perhaps. Unji stood and walked to the window, looking out at the stars. Or perhaps not. Things are changing, Yuna. What happened in that atrium changed things. People saw what your people do to those they consider lesser. And many of them did not like what they saw. But your rules. Our rules protect cultural autonomy, yes. But they also protect individuals from extreme harm. There is a balance. And I think that balance is about to shift. Yuna did not dare to hope. Hope was dangerous. Hope was painful. But something in Yunji's voice made her wonder if maybe, just maybe, this time would be different. That evening, Yuna found Taeho on the observation deck. He was out of the medical bay now, though his face was still marked with bruises and bandages. He stood at the window, looking out at the same stars they had shared on her first night aboard the station. She approached slowly, uncertain of her welcome. He turned when he heard her footsteps, and nodded in greeting. "How are you feeling?" he asked. It was such a strange question. No one had ever asked how she felt before. Her feelings did not matter. She was pale. "I am confused," she admitted. "Captain Unji asked me to tell my story." She listened. She seemed to care. "I do not understand why. Because you matter. Your experiences matter. What was done to you matters." "But why?" Taeho was quiet for a moment, considering the question. "Do you know what makes humans different from many species?" Yuna shook her head. "We are not the strongest. We are not the fastest. We do not have scales or claws or natural weapons. In the early days of galactic contact, many species wondered how we had survived at all. How did you survive? We cooperated. We protected each other. When one of us was weak, others would carry them. When one of us was threatened, others would fight for them. We survived because we refused to let our weakest members be abandoned." He turned to face her fully. "That is what I did in the atrium. Not because I wanted to be a hero. Not because I wanted attention. But because you were in danger. And I could not just watch it happen. It goes against everything I am." Yuna thought about this. The concept was foreign to her. So different from everything she had been taught. "Among my people," she said slowly, "the strong do not protect the weak. The strong use the weak. That is the natural order. That is how it has always been. Then perhaps it is time for a new order." Before Yuna could respond, footsteps echoed behind them. She turned to see Do-hun approaching, a warm smile on his face. "There you are," he said. "I have been looking for you, Yuna. I brought something." He held out a small container. Inside was food. Not the plain nutrition bars that servants were given, but real food. Colorful, and fragrant, and beautiful. "It is from the human commissary," Do-hun explained. "I thought you might like to try something different." Yuna stared at the container. She did not know what to say. Gifts. Kindness. Questions about her feelings. These things did not happen to pale ones. "Thank you," she managed. Do-hun sat down on a bench near the window and gestured for her to join him. After a moment of hesitation, she did. Taeho sat on her other side. They shared the meal together, the three of them, while stars wheeled past the observation window. Do-hun told stories about his home world, about his family, about the small farming community where he had grown up. Taeho shared memories of his training, of difficult missions, of the comrades he had lost and the ones he had saved. Yuna listened, fascinated. These humans were so open, so willing to share themselves. They did not hide behind walls of tradition and hierarchy. They simply connected. "What about you?" Do-hun asked eventually. "What was your home like?" "Before the servant house, I mean." "I do not remember," Yuna said. "I was taken when I was very young. I have no memories of my parents or my birthplace. That is terrible. It is normal. For pale ones, normal does not mean right. Dohun's voice was gentle but firm. What was done to you was wrong, Yuna. Not because of some diplomatic rule or cultural clash. Wrong because it was cruel. Wrong because it caused unnecessary suffering. Wrong because every person deserves better. Yuna felt tears building behind her eyes again. She seemed to cry so much lately. She was not used to it. I do not know how to be anything else, she whispered. I do not know how to be a person instead of a servant. I do not know how to live without fear. Teho put a hand on her shoulder. The touch was light, gentle. Nothing like the rough grabs she was accustomed to. You will learn, he said. We will help you. Yuna looked at him, then at Dohun. Two humans. Two strangers who had shown her more kindness in a few days than her own species had shown in her entire life. Why? She asked. Why do you help me? What do you want from me? Teho and Dohun exchanged a look. Then, Dohun laughed softly. We do not want anything from you, he said. That is the whole point. You are our friend. And friends help each other. Friend. Yuna had never had a friend before. She was not entirely sure what the word meant. But sitting there, sharing food with two humans who had shown her nothing but kindness, she thought she was beginning to understand. The Coalition Council chamber was vast and circular, with seats rising in tiers around a central speaking floor. Representatives from dozens of species filled the room, their varied forms creating a tapestry of galactic diversity. Insectoids clicked their mandibles. Aquatic beings floated in specially designed tanks, energy beings flickered and pulsed, and humans sat among them, small and soft but somehow commanding attention. Yuna sat in the gallery, watching. She was not supposed to be here. Servants were not allowed in the council chamber. But Captain Yunji had arranged for her presence, arguing that she deserved to see what her testimony had set in motion. The session had been called to address the incident in the atrium and the broader questions it had raised about Valorian treatment of pale-scaled individuals. For the first time in generations, the Coalition was formally examining a member species' internal cultural practices. Elder Borum sat with the Valorian delegation, his expression carefully neutral. But Yuna could see the tension in his posture. The fury barely contained behind his diplomatic mask. He had tried everything to prevent this session. He had called in favors, made threats, offered bribes. Nothing had worked. The council speaker, a tall crystalline being who chimed when she moved, opened the proceedings. We are gathered to discuss coalition principles regarding cultural autonomy and individual protection, she announced. Specifically, we must address the treatment of what Valorians call pale ones. Several species have raised concerns. Humanity has provided evidence. Valoria has been given the opportunity to respond. Borum rose to speak. His voice was smooth and practiced. The voice of a diplomat who had talked his way out of difficult situations before. The treatment of pale ones is a religious matter, he said. Our faith teaches that scale coloration reflects spiritual completeness. Pale ones are born with incomplete souls. They require guidance, structure, and yes, occasionally, physical correction. This is not cruelty. It is compassion. We are helping them fulfill what little purpose their limited existence allows. A murmur ran through the chamber. Some representatives nodded. Others shifted uncomfortably. We have respected Valorian customs for centuries, Borum continued. We ask only for the same respect now. Cultural autonomy is a cornerstone of the coalition. If we allow one species to dictate the internal practices of another, we open the door to endless conflict and interference. He sat down, confident in his argument. Cultural autonomy was indeed a sacred principle in the coalition. It had prevented wars, maintained peace, allowed wildly different societies to coexist. But then, Captain Unji stood. With respect to the honorable delegate, she said, I would like to present evidence that challenges his characterization of Valorian practices. She activated a display screen. Security footage from the atrium began to play. The chamber watched in silence as Boram accused Yuna of theft, raised his staff, and was intercepted by Teho. They watched as Teho took blow after blow, blood spattering across the floor, and refused to fall. This footage shows Elder Borum physically assaulting both a Coalition security officer and, by intention, a Valorian servant, Yunji said. My officer's recordings also proved that the accusation of theft was false. The documents in question were moved by a member of the Valorian delegation, not by the servant. Another murmur, louder this time. Additionally, Unji continued, we have collected testimony from the servant in question. She has described years of systematic abuse, not just by Elder Borum, but by Valorian society as a whole. Physical beatings, starvation, denial of medical care. She has witnessed other Pale Ones die from their injuries. Borum shot to his feet. That testimony is meaningless. Pale Ones cannot give valid testimony under Valorian law. Their word carries no weight. Their word carries no weight. We are not in Valorian space, Yunji said calmly. This is Coalition Station Horizon. Here, every person can speak, and the Council must decide. Are we truly going to protect cultural practices that result in torture, slavery, and death? The chamber erupted in debate. Species that had quietly accepted Valorian customs for generations suddenly had questions. How many Pale Ones were there? What exactly happened to them? Why had no one investigated before? The session lasted for hours. Representatives argued about cultural autonomy, universal rights, the limits of tolerance. Some defended the Valorians. Others condemned them. Many simply sat in troubled silence, wrestling with questions that had no easy answers. Finally, the council speaker called for order. It is clear that we cannot resolve this matter today, she announced. However, I am prepared to make several immediate rulings. The chamber fell silent. First, Elder Borum has been found to have made false accusations against a servant in his care. He has also physically assaulted a Coalition officer. He is hereby removed from the Valorian delegation and ordered to return to Valoria immediately. Borum's face turned dark with fury, but he said nothing. There was nothing he could say. Second, the servant known as Yuna is hereby placed under Coalition protection. She will not be returned to Valorian custody. Her application for asylum will be expedited. In the gallery, Yuna stopped breathing. Asylum. She had not dared to hope for asylum. Third, the Coalition will conduct a formal review of Valorian practices regarding pale-scaled individuals. This review will take time, but it will be thorough. We must determine whether these practices violate Coalition principles of basic sapient rights. The speaker paused, her crystalline form chiming softly. Cultural autonomy is precious, she said. But it cannot be absolute. We must protect difference, yes. But we must also protect those who suffer at the hands of difference. Finding that balance is our eternal challenge. The session ended. The chamber began to empty. But Yuna remained in her seat, unable to move. Asylum. She would not be sent back. She would not face punishment for speaking. She was free. Captain Yunji appeared at her side. Are you all right? Yuna looked up at her with eyes full of tears. I do not know, she admitted. I have never been free before. I do not know how to feel. Unji smiled. It was small, but warm. You have time to figure it out. All the time in the universe. That evening, Yuna sat with Teho and Dohun on the observation deck. The same deck where she had first seen kindness in a human face. The same stars wheeled past the window. What happens now? Dohun asked. The Valorian delegation will complete the treaty negotiations, Teho said. But there will be new provisions. Requirements for oversight of servant treatment. Pathways for asylum seekers. It is not revolution, but it is a start. And Borum? Gone. He left on a transport this afternoon. Teho's jaw tightened. He will probably face no consequences on Valoria, but he will never again represent his people in Coalition space. Yuna listened to them talk, still struggling to process everything that had happened. A week ago, she had been property, an object, a pale nothing who existed only to serve and suffer. Now she was free. I do not know what to do with freedom, she said quietly. I have no skills except serving. I have no education. I have nothing. Do-hun reached over and took her hand. You have us. And you have time. You can learn anything you want. Become anyone you want. That is what freedom means. Is it really that simple? Taeho shook his head. No. It will be hard. You will have to unlearn a lifetime of pain and fear. You will have to build a new understanding of yourself and your place in the universe. It will take years. But you will not be alone, Do-hun added. We will be here. Every step of the way. Yuna looked at them. These strange, soft, impossible humans who had changed her life simply by refusing to look away from her suffering. Why? She asked one more time. Why do humans do this? Why do you help strangers? Why do you risk yourselves for people you do not know? Taeho considered the question. Because if we do not, who will? It was such a simple answer. So obvious that it should have been meaningless. But somehow, it meant everything. 6 months had passed since the day in the atrium. 6 months since Taeho had taken a beating for a stranger. 6 months since Yuna had learned that she was not worthless. The treaty had been signed. The Valorians had gotten their trade routes. But they had paid a price. New provisions required regular inspections of servant quarters. New pathways allowed pale ones to seek asylum in coalition space. New eyes watched for the old cruelties. It was not enough. It would never be enough. Centuries of tradition did not change in months. But it was a beginning. Yuna stood in her quarters on Coalition Station Horizon. Not a storage closet. A real room. With a real bed. With a window that looked out at the stars. She still sometimes woke in the night, confused by the space around her, expecting to feel the cold floor of a servant's closet beneath her. But each morning, she remembered. She was free. Today was her last day on the station. She had been offered resettlement on a human colony world called New Busan. It was a small planet, mostly ocean, with scattered island communities that welcomed refugees from across the galaxy. She would have support there. Housing. Education. The chance to become whoever she wanted to be. She was terrified. But she was also ready. A knock came at her door. She opened it to find Do-hun, carrying a small wrapped package. A going-away present, he said, pressing it into her hands. Open it later. When you need to remember that you have friends. Yuna held the package carefully. It was the first gift she had ever received. I do not know how to thank you, she said, for everything you have done. Do-hun pulled her into a hug. She stiffened at first, still unused to casual touch, but then slowly relaxed into it. You do not have to thank me, he said. Just live well. That is all the thanks any of us need. He released her and stepped back, wiping his eyes quickly. I have to get back to the medical bay. But I will visit New Busan when I get leave. I expect you to show me all the best restaurants. I will try to find them. Do-hun smiled and walked away, waving over his shoulder. Yuna watched him go, her heart's aching with a feeling she was only beginning to recognize as love. She finished packing her small bag of belongings. She did not have much. A few changes of clothing. The medical kit Taeho had given her that first night. Some books Do-hun had recommended. The wrapped package, and a small mirror. She had avoided mirrors for most of her life. Looking at her pale scales only reminded her of everything she was not, everything she could never be. But lately, she had started to look at herself differently. She picked up the mirror now and studied her reflection. Pale silver scales, large dark eyes, a face that had never been called beautiful by her own kind. But humans did not see ugliness when they looked at her. They saw a person, a friend, someone worth protecting. Maybe, Yuna thought, she could learn to see herself that way too. The transport was scheduled to leave in 2 hours. She had one more goodbye to say. She found Taeho on the observation deck. Of course he was there. It was their place now. The spot where everything had changed. Where she had first glimpsed the possibility of a different life. He turned when he heard her approach. His face had healed completely. No scars remained from Borum's beating. But Yuna knew he carried other scars, invisible ones, from a life spent standing between the cruel and their victims. "Your transport leaves soon," he said. "Yes. Are you ready?" Yuna considered the question. "I do not know. I am afraid. I have never lived without fear before. I do not know who I am when I am not afraid." Teho nodded slowly. "That is normal. Fear becomes familiar. Safe. In a strange way. Learning to live without it takes time. Will I ever stop being afraid? Probably not completely. But you will learn to move forward anyway. You will learn that fear does not have to control you." He paused. "You are stronger than you know, Yuna. You survived things that would have broken most people. You did not just survive. You kept your kindness. You kept your heart. That is remarkable." Yuna felt tears building. She had cried more in the past 6 months than in all the years before combined. But these were different tears. They did not burn. They felt like release. "I still do not understand," she said. "Why you did what you did. Why you took a beating for a stranger. Why you changed my whole life without asking for anything in return." Teho was quiet for a long moment, looking out at the stars. "When I was young," he said finally, "I read a story about a pale star. A star that burned less bright than its neighbors. The other stars looked down on it, called it weak, called it lesser. But one day, a traveler came to that part of space. The traveler was lost, alone, searching for home. And the pale star, though it burned less bright, was the only one that reached out to guide them. It shone and shone until the traveler found their way." He turned to face her. The story ended with a simple lesson. It does not matter how bright you burn. What matters is that you burn for others. Yuna stared at him. "That is a human story? My grandmother told it to me. She said it was about kindness. About finding purpose not in being the strongest or the brightest, but in helping others. I never forgot it." "And you saw yourself in the pale star?" Teho shook his head. "No. I saw you." Yuna could not speak. Her throat was too tight, her heart's too full. "You were alone," Teho continued. "Lost. Surrounded by those who should have protected you but only caused harm. And despite everything, you kept going. You kept burning. You are the pale star, Yuna. And now you get to shine." She stepped forward and embraced him. This time, she did not stiffen. She held on tightly, letting his warmth anchor her, letting his steadiness ground her. "Thank you," she whispered, "for seeing me." "Always," he said. They stood together for a long moment. Two people from different worlds who had found something precious in each other. Then Yuna stepped back and wiped her eyes. "I have to go." "I know. Will I see you again?" Teho smiled. "New Busan is not that far. I am sure I can find reasons to visit." Yuna laughed. It was still an unfamiliar sound, her own laughter. But it was becoming easier, more natural. She picked up her bag and walked toward the door. At the threshold, she paused and looked back. "Teho?" "Yes?" "The measure of a society is how it treats its weakest members. You told me that once. But I think you were wrong." He raised an eyebrow. "Oh? The measure of a society is not how it treats its weakest members. It is how its strongest members choose to stand for them." She smiled, a real smile. Full and warm and unafraid. "You taught me that." She turned and walked away, toward the transport that would carry her to a new life. Behind her, Teho watched her go, a proud smile on his face. The pale star had found her way, and she was finally going home. Somewhere in the vast darkness of space, a small transport ship carried a Valorian refugee toward a human colony world. She sat by the window, watching stars drift past, thinking about everything she had lost and everything she had gained. She was still afraid. She suspected she always would be. At least a little. But she was also hopeful, and for someone who had spent her whole life believing she was worthless, hope was the greatest gift of all. She thought of Teho and Do-hun. She thought of Captain Unji in the council chamber. She thought of all the beings across the galaxy who had looked at her and seen a person instead of a pale nothing. She opened the package Do-hun had given her. Inside was a small crystal star, meant to hang in a window and catch the light. A note was attached. It read, "Even pale stars shine bright enough to guide someone home." Yuna hung the crystal in her cabin window and watched it sparkle. Then she turned toward the future and began to plan.